The total number of volunteers from Britain and Ireland is estimated at 2,500, with roughly 80% of them being members of the Communist Party of Britain. The records from the International Brigades Association have 169 of them being volunteers from the Young Communist League of Britain. So from the beginning of 1937 until near the end of 1938, the British Battalion fought major battles in Jarama, Brunete, Aragon, Teruel and Ebro. In total, roughly 500 volunteers gave their lives across these valleys and fields, 1/5 of the volunteers sleeping forever beneath the Spanish soil. Volunteers such as Jimmy Rutherford, who was 20 years old and from Edinburgh. He was among the first men to volunteer and was captured and sentenced to death. He joked around in order to keep his fellow prisoners cheerful and hopeful, even though he expected to be killed at any moment. But he was released in an exchange of prisoners and returned to England. But not satisfied with doing enough back home, he returned to Spain in spite of it all. Eventually he was recaptured, recognised and executed by Franco's forces. Volunteers such as Thora Silverthorne from South Wales, who survived the war but is the only known female volunteer for the Young Communist League, and she served as a nurse behind the front lines, with many comrades surely owing their lives to her. After returning from Spain, she carried on the struggle for medical reform in Britain for many years before passing away in 1999. Volunteers such as Charlie Hutchison from Fulham, who also survived the war, both in fact, the only black volunteer from Briton. He was initially a machine gunner before an injury nearly sent the then 18-year-old home due to his young age. But instead he managed to stay and worked as an ambulance driver. After returning back, it was less than 1 year before Britain entered World War II, and Charlie served in the British Army, taking part in the Dunkirk evacuation, the Italian campaign, the North African campaign, and in the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, which he later described as the worst day of his entire life. Charlie had spent almost 10 years in armed conflict against fascist forces, and on his return he started a family, remaining an active communist until his death in 1993 at the age of 74. And volunteers such as John Cornford, one of the most well-known, a YCL and Communist Party member from Cambridge. He was a poet and great-grandson of Charles Darwin. While in Spain, he wrote to his partner, Margot Heinemann, saying, "No wars are nice, and even a revolutionary war is ugly enough. But I'm becoming a good soldier, longish endurance and a capacity for living in the present and enjoying all that can be enjoyed. There's a tough time ahead, but I've plenty of strength left for it. Well, one day the war will end. I'll give it till June or July, and then if I'm alive, I'm coming back to you. I think about you often, but there's nothing I can do but to say again, be happy, darling, and I'll see you again one day." 2 weeks later, on December 27th, 1936, Cornford turned 21. The next day, he was killed in action in the town of Lopera in the south of Spain. There are many stories like this, and in total we currently have a list of 63 members of the Young Communist League who are martyred in Spain, but their sacrifice was not done in vain. Although the Republic fell and victory did not come to Spain, it influenced the knowledge and opinion of the British public, created thousands of new activists, drawing them into the anti-fascist struggle, and contributed massively to the long-term defeat of fascism later on in 1945. I'm just going to read through the names of our Roll of Honour, and afterwards we're going to have a 1-minute silence. Frank Arlyle, John Alexander, Alexander Armstrong, Sidney Abner, William Ball, John Beaton, William Beckett, Arthur Ernest Bird, Kenneth Bradbury, David Buffman, Edward Burke, Ralph Cantor, John Connolly, John Cornford, Raymond Cox, Maurice Davidovich, George Deegan, Thomas Dolan, James Duffy, William Durston, William Featherstone, Sidney Fink, John Finnegan, Thomas Flynn, William Giles, Alfred Gold, Robert Goodman, Robert Grant, Harry Gross, David Guest, James Hindman, William Jackson, Lawrence Jordan, Robert Patrick Kenny, James Kermode, Fred Killick, Clifford Lacey, Samuel Lee, Alexander Leopard, Alfred Marks, William Edward Mackenzie, William Maguire, David McKay, Martin Messer, Max Nash, Arthur Newsom, Thomas Aldshaw, James Ray, James Rutherford, William Seal, Nathan Segal, Victor Shamar, John Sylvester, Walter Tallis, Abraham Trauber, Roy Watts, George Westfield, James Wheeler, Frank Whitehead, Norman Wilkinson, Bernard Winfield, Anthony Yates, and Stephen Yates.